doing the record. Beautiful. So welcome back to the second session in terms of looking at the development stage. So we've asked you to think about what will your course look like? You know, who are the, well, let me take a step back. What are the learning outcomes? That's where we always sort of start with. So for most of us, it'll be the unit of competency. So what are the learning outcomes? Who are the people that we are addressing those learning outcomes for? Where are we going? So we do all this analysis stuff. Where are we going to put this thing? Do we need any special resources? Who's going to facilitate it? What kind of skills have they got when we ask them to do certain things? Scoping it, that is, get that high level, what will the whole thing look like, and getting that out of your head so that other people can give you input. And then we ask you to think about designing just a small part of that so that you can get that into the next stage, which is the development stage. So that's what we're going to look at today. I think just a quick reminder, in terms of when we're in this space, if you don't mind, in this main room, if we just have muted mics, if you're not talking, that then indicates to me when your mic is on that you do want to talk. So it's just a nice indicator. It just stops the need to kind of put up hands and so on. Videos is up to you. Bandwidths may dictate that, or whatever's going on. Don't forget the chat. The chat's everybody's space, so don't feel that you need to wait for us to instruct you in the chat in any way. So please use that if it's relevant to what's going on, an aha moment, something you've done, a question, a link, etc. And we'll do the same. I'm a bit of a chatter, both verbally and in the online space. So first of all, what I'd like to do is just to reflect back on where we've been before we move you forward to where we need you to go. So it might be one or all parts of these processes. So we said, look, analyze your environment and who's going to use it, how it's going to look like. Scope it, get that high-end stuff, high level ideas, and then storyboard. Right? So that's where we were. And then I'd like you to think, grab your annotate tool, grab the stamp or the draw. So have a look on your annotate tool. You'll see there's draw, there's stamp. Choose one of those. And then look at these emojis and which one best illustrates how you think that process went for you. So I'll just give you a moment to find the tool, think about what happened over the last couple of weeks in terms of these processes. And then I can tell you, I have turned the annotate off, so you can quite honestly pick whichever one you want for how you feel. And if you don't want to comment on it, you don't have to either. So I'll just be quiet for a minute. Excellent. So we've got what all good teachers want to see is happy students. So we've got a couple of little stamps down here that I can see. So does anyone want to share what worked well about going through that process, whether it was just one slither of it or the three steps in the first stages of designing the course? Any positive things that went well for you? Did the tools work? Did the ideas of getting it out of your head kind of were they confronting and therefore made you think about things differently? Was there anything that you found, Shauna?
Analysing was easy because could see the bigger picture, knew what we needed to do to get there, to do all of that. And then I looked at the storyboarding and just went, oh my God, I've chosen a diploma. Like the logical steps and work in getting to the bigger picture is holy moly. Learning designers are not paid enough.
And that's why it's good that you did the thinking outside of your head now and not start in the development stage.
Yeah.
So you can go, right, okay, hang on. We've been asked to be quite micro here. How am I going to roll that across a diploma? So
that's months worth of work.
Yep. So that's why keep it small, have the longer term vision, never lose the longer term vision, right? That's what you want. But choose a unit that either lends itself best to being online. So no units are really only knowledge based in ours. Some may lend themselves better to others. Or if there's a sticking point in one of your units where you know that things like the quality of the content or something's not quite there, and so you know there's a need to improve something. So that's a good starting point as well.
Yeah, got it. I'm changing tactic. Starting over.
Yep. So for us, you don't need to go back and do these at that stage. You might just want to look at the storyboard part of it rather than go back and do the analysis and the scoping, because they probably are fairly cover similar things.
Yeah.
But yeah, at least get some ideas out of your head around what it might look like.
Perfect. Thanks.
Joanna, can I just ask, for some reason I've got you recorded as Joe, but I might have asked you before, and that's why I've got you recorded as Joe, but is it Joe, Joanna? Just remind me.
Yeah, either is fine, Joe or Joanna.
Fantastic.
You know, if I'm in trouble, I'm Joanna.
That's why I always ask. That's why I always ask. And I hear people say, my mum only says I'm naughty. So Joe, what did you find useful?
Yeah, I found it quite useful. I liked having to kind of sit and really plan out the whole thing, which I think lots of people who go into this process possibly don't do that, and that can be an issue in that you end up with something that you didn't quite want or didn't quite go as planned, whereas this is much more controlled. The only thing that I found, which I think I commented on the discussion forum, was that I felt I was a bit constrained in planning just what I know, whereas I'm quite keen to look at what else is out there in terms of the platforms and what their capabilities are, and then I might make it a bit more creative or a bit more interesting than what I had in my plan.
So it's the chicken and the egg, isn't it? So
yeah,
is it the chicken? Do we give you all of the tools, or is it the egg that we? So my approach is usually, what's the learning outcomes? What do we need students to look like? That kind of picture of competence. What do we need the students to be actually able to do when they finish this learning? What learning activities fit that? And then what's the informational content and presentation requirements? So there is a bit of a, if you could overlap them, would work better. So ideally by the end of this session, you've got some ways that how you might present the information in the development stage.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Anybody in the oh my God, I'm shocked stage? Anybody want to share anything that didn't work well, or would like some advice on anything? You don't have to out yourself, so you don't have to say I didn't. Right? So I know where you are. You don't have to tell the whole world, but is there anything at this stage where you thought, oh, it would have been good if we had this, or I'm really not sure about that? Because ideally now is a good time to share it, because other people may have experienced something similar, or we might be able to give you advice at all. So thank you, Carl. Just acknowledge that. Yep, good, the storyboard. And so remember the storyboards, we've given you an example of the storyboards, of potential ones. There's quite often I just use a pen and paper as well, right? And so I don't necessarily get all the content out, but at least I've got some things that I can move around and get my ideas. All right, any other last comments? Oh, Carl, please.
So something I found. So what I'm doing overall is basically just knowledge content for a certificate 3 in supply chain course. So we'll do face-to-face training as well for practical things. But we have a national client that kind of said to us, hey, do all this stuff, do as much as you can remotely, so we can, help it work with our scheduling better. And then, when you need to go into the branches and see people, we can do the things that you need to there and not worry about the other stuff. And I'd started in a lot of different spots and gotten lost, but this time I did exactly what you said before, as focus on what makes the most sense to be delivering online, and started from there. And I found that, yeah, storyboarding it was very helpful. Like, rather than, quite a few times I started somewhere and then got a bit bogged down, like, oh, I don't know about this, I might just start again. And yeah, there's only so many times you can handle doing that, I think. But as for scoping it, I don't think it kind of doesn't make sense for me to scope just the part that I storyboarded. So I've basically storyboarded, you know, something like a 50th of the course or something. Yeah, it'll be very big eventually. But so I was thinking more about going back to that document and looking at scoping out at least one of the kind of themed clusters for it, and then just storyboarding those sections rather than trying to scope each small section.
So the beauty of the scope for this client is, and it can just be dot points, right? So we're thinking this, or again, it could be just a handwritten thing. This is how I'm thinking this will look like as across maybe the qualification or across the unit. And then the client can go, yeah, we agree with this, or no, that's not what we were thinking. So some of the times what we're doing is getting it out of your head, so you've got a process and you're not spending lots of time, because developing it can take a lot of time. And also making sure before you spend a lot of time in development that those things are ironed out. So the last thing we want to do is backpedal on something we've done. So getting it out of the head. So for me, it's usually, you know, somebody says, we're looking for this type of training. And I go, okay, this is how I perceive it. And I just kind of put it into that kind of table format and then give it to them. And they might say, no, actually that's not, or I want more of this or less of that. And it just saves me, before I have to go into the storyboards, that I already know whether I've got the content or the overarching things. Michael, did you want to add anything at all?
Well, I just wondered, I mean, I've been doing this morning. I wonder if you would like me to share my screen, and maybe I can talk a little bit about this process, because it is a difficult one, and it's often a good place to kind of connect that relationship with your client. So if you can give me screen share, right? I'll
Sorry, I just needed to save and clear it. All right,
yeah,
stop
sure.
sharing.
So, you know, what you mentioned, Carl, is like just really common problem. I'm not sure if you can see my screen or not. But this is kind of where we sort of start. And this is a unit around, I think it's to do with supporting like ICT support, this kind of industry. So what we're trying to do is kind of look at the content. They've got some content, but we're looking at gaps here and a learner guide that's not very good. And so we're trying to say, well, how might we address that competency with some particular content, and then what activities might support that. So it's very often you're kind of really casting the net, if you don't know the unit here, to think, okay, do I understand this, how it would work, and how can I put it into a bit of a flow? And so this is very much about an active process of supporting a client with a ICT issue. And it could be software, it could be hardware, could be anything. The whole unit revolves around that. So it's really dry. So one mechanism we do, and to try and get over the line, is create a company. And so we create a company that's an example. So then we can say, you know, you have to follow a procedure. For example, Luminous Technologies has an industry, or you can even kind of personalize to say, Luminous Technologies have come to you for a solution to what mediums we might use to support this kind of client. So it becomes a bit of a storytelling device and makes it a little less dry. But the purpose of this document is to get the client or your superior or the manager to say, you've had a look at the overall unit and you've created a theme and you've covered it. And more importantly, you've consulted your assessment documents to make sure that you're capturing from your mapping all the information that kind of should be in there, and perhaps redrafting it in a way that you're not giving the answers kind of thing. So with you guys, it might be just one of these because you're doing a small snippet to kind of get started. But once you kind of get an idea of where you're going with it, and you really have to have a big picture, if you start to see every unit as a kind of a journey, And the journey usually to do is with understand the lay of the land of the task, clarify what the task is, maybe do some research, have a crack at the task, or do the task, and then maybe either evaluate what you've done or clean up, be sustainable, whatever it is that's in that kind of, it's always a step through. So if you can think of the unit as a learning journey or work journey, then it does help you to think about how you might sort of storify that or depict it to whoever's got to give sign off. So it's a really simple document that just has topic, performance criteria. This topic you can make up, it's your interpretation, similar to how you deliver it in, say, face-to-face environment with your own themes. These themes are different names from the performance criteria, but you're mapping them, this one's not finished, you're mapping them against the various components of the competency and what the content you're suggesting for that, much of which you'll have, and then what kind of online activities you might do. At this stage, you don't really know, but you're just suggesting what they might be. And once you get sign off on this, or you have the to and fro with the SME, then you can update it. But at that point, you've got everybody on the page, and it's when you get to the next stage, when you develop it, that problems can begin with clients having it, or your management having a different view of what they thought was going to be in their head to what they kind of see it. So it can be kind of useful to just get a big picture theme like you were trying to suggesting, Carl, and then like diving into the writing once you've kind of got sign off.
Yeah, this is quite similar to what I did earlier this week. I took our, because I'm using pre-developed materials and then changing it to be free learning, and I did it based off, so I took our mapping document, put everything into Excel, and kind of checked what criteria I was hitting where, and yeah, it did exactly that. So broke the theme into 10 chunks and just focused on one of them. Yeah.
Fabulous. Yeah, it's it just sort of helps to get in your own head, doesn't it? And it sounds
absolutely
similar.
Yeah.
We do a gap analysis before that. This is very similar, working off commercial content, and there's a lot of gaps, heaps of gaps in it. So this is kind of where this comes from. But yeah, good one. Well, I'll share back with you, Alison.
So again, there's different tools. That one's a great one for, I love it that it's got the beautiful. Love it that it's got already got the PCs in there. I'm trying to write some assessments at the moment, or recreate them really. Anyway, all right. So the early stages are really, really valuable. They might feel like you're taking up time where you could be just jumping in. In my experience, it's better that if you just take a bit of time there and get not only just sign off if it's a client or whatever, but get somebody else's input into it, then it can actually save you a lot of time down the other end as well. So this is what we're going to look at today. I'll just give you a moment. All right, so guess what? That translates into this. And just like we asked you the last time, right? We're going to get together. So we're together now. We're going to talk about the development and the quality assurance processes around developing in an online space. Your case for action is your online course. You'll need to change practice currently within your organisation or whomever you're supporting. So that's the case for action, the case for change. Look about the development, and then guess what? We'll ask you post this to go away and develop at least a small segment of your storyboards or your online course, wherever you think it's appropriate for you to start. Come back and share with us. So we'll discuss how that might look, probably screenshots, I'm thinking. I don't think you'll be allowed to get us into some of your online course or online environments. And then we'll come back for the final session and learn some more about implementing and evaluating. But Michael, do you want to just, I don't know if this is covered in terms of what you talked about before, but in terms of this, now you've done the writing, some of the writing part of it, or drafting part of stuff.
Yeah, just sort of introduce you to a bit of a flow. I mean, there's a lot of arrows and things there, but this is really kind of a process designed to save you time and extra work, because it's all about getting whoever you're responsible to provide this material an agreed process, because this is where things can really fall apart. So you've completed the draft, and then the first step might be to do some internal checks, and that might be at the level of grammar, plain English, readability, that kind of thing. So really a look over the kind of wording and how it's structured. Then you would probably get, and sometimes it's one and the same person, some SMA feedback. So if you're not the SMA, Carl, for example, you're working off a learner guide like I am, then you need to get that check to make sure that you've aligned it with their understanding of, or how they deliver the competency, their kind of view on it. So that then gives you first touch point of some feedback and some rectifications to your storyboard. And we'll talk a little bit more about rectifications and what you ask for a little bit later on, except to say that one of the key things that people slip up on rectification is that the feedback that they get is really vague. So we generally say to people, SMEs particularly, if you don't agree with what I've written or I've missed something, provide the draft, the exact words that you want me to put in. That way you've dealt with the SME and you've finished with them. You don't have to go back and forward to them. Once you've completed that, you might take it back for another internal check just on your language and whatever, but probably not. You go and build it in your chosen platform, and then you would get your feedback and rectifications again. Again, that doesn't have to be the SME, that might be internally, or it might be the client to get off and have a look. Now, this is where it gets a little bit, things can happen a little bit differently depending on the client. You might then publish it or hand it over, and it might be delivered immediately. And while it's being delivered, there's some stakeholder feedback being collected, broken links, lack of functionality, inaccurate materials, and you might be responsible for doing a little bit of triage on the course along the way, maybe for a set period of time to protect yourself, say 2 or 3 weeks after delivery starts. But you'd be asking them to slot away any additional improvements they might want to see so that you can start the process again when it comes up time for review. So the 2 important things is that you want to minimize the amount of feedback that you get, and you reinforce to whoever's feeding back to you that you get one shot at it. So this SME gets the one shot at the draft stage to provide their feedback. They give you the exact wording so that you can change and rectify it, get sign off. You've got sign off, then you can go ahead and build. Because once you can then say at this point, well, look, you signed off on the SMA feedback back there, and I've built it according to that, and we had agreed to have one. Now, it seems a bit tin-tacky, but I tell you, you can really get caught with going toing and froing and whatever. And I mean, if you've got a client like you have, Carl, sometimes you'll do that. You'll wear that you'll go through a really nice process, but they'll demand changes, and you'll say to yourself, I could be over-servicing here, but I want to keep this client. So it's a really difficult kind of balance. So that's just something to keep in mind to protect yourself, so that it's really clear you're not kind of toing and froing. Alison, do you want to talk about ADDIE again?
Yeah, so I mean that is an ADDIE in its own right, and so, but yeah, Michael's talking about certainly when you're the contractor, which is what Michael's describing. When you're the contractor, or even if you're the learning design person responsible for designing for somebody else's courses, then get the rectification done before the build, because that's going to save so much time as much as possible. Hence why we've got you to look at those, kind of getting it out of your head and into those documents. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk about development today. So Michael's given it a nice kind of overview of the whole process. This is some of the sub-processes. All right, so we're going to talk at the design process. And again, I'll take a bit of a purist approach, where I see 4 steps at this in the design process, and Michael had them in his flow chart there as well. So basically what I want you to do is, first of all, make sure you've got your annotate tool, because when we swapped over before, your annotate tool would have hidden. So you'll have to get that back out again. Go to the drawer, and in the drawer on the annotate tool, you'll see there's a squiggly line or there's a sharp straight line. Either one will work, right? So get the annotate tool out first. That's what I'm looking for. Now there's 4 steps, 1, 2, 3, 4. And I've given you 4 options. So what I want you to do is go, all right, for step, which one do you think step 1? So this is a really analog thing that you do sometimes on pen and paper. Click your draw, start at step 1, and then draw the line to which of the 4 areas do you think step 1, then step time, draw your line to which one you think is step 2, step 3, step 4. Any problems with annotate, please just unmute your mic and let me know. Cool. Get some action happening, action jackson. Time's gone through quite quickly.
Is this assuming that you've kind of already analysed and
We're at the development stage.
designed? We're at the development stage.
Yep.
Okay.
So let's park, analyze, and design. That we've done all that and signed
Okay.
off. We've got, I have it in my contract with the client that says you will prove you've approved and signed off on that content for which we will use to build the one that Michael's talking about. But you don't build it and then they go, oh, we're not really happy with that. We're not really happy with that. So, but I'm happy to change it, but you'll have to pay more because it's going to take us more time. Right? So we've finished at that stage. They've signed off and approved your storyboards and your content and your designs and so on. Now you're ready to develop it. Excellent. I've got beautiful. So please let me know if you've got any issues with draw. So I think we've got most people's interpretations there. Excellent. All right. So there's 4 stages. So the first stage is, yes, you have to develop it. Then I would do some quality assurance internally. So whether it's, I usually do the design and I get somebody else to develop it. So I usually do the quality assurance when it comes back. Then we do some testing and trialing, and then we evaluate what we've got from that test and trial. So similar to the whole ADDIE process, but we do it within the actual development stage before we let it loose with real students, right? So we want to try and get as many issues out the way before we give them to the students, before we give them to the client, and then the client gives them to the students. I think I grabbed that. Let me just grab it in case I didn't. And so we're going to go through some of this today, right? So I'll just let you have a quick look about what this process is. So we're all, and then at the very end of that whole thing again, sign off, right? Sign off to say, yep, you're happy with it before the students get it, because how we look at it and use it and then how the students get hold of it and do stuff can be another thing. Students, for some reason, seem to be very unique in their approach to things. So Michael's going to give you some of his experience around this building process.
All right. Okay. So I'm going to talk a bit about online components, what's there, how to write for them, and some methodologies to kind of try and make your content, interesting if you can, engaging if possible, but just to have a bit of diversity in what it is that you kind of create. So yeah, I'll have a bit of a chat about that. But where I want to kind of start with is I did a job last year for an organisation, very big organisation. I was just doing some contract work for another organisation who contracted to them. And so they had this magnificent process of online quality, got evaluation until you dropped and rectification until you dropped, and all beautifully documented and whatever. And so they had this pristine, beautiful, engaging LMS, and we wrote for it, and hopefully it was engaging to students. But they dropped a little morsel, which said that to me, which it says that this is all really interesting. They said that when they analyze their statistics of students, the majority of students looked at this beautiful content 3 days before assessment was due. So it tells you a little bit about, what they're looking for quickly and fast, despite all this beautiful stuff that you kind of put in. I mean, if you get around that by putting in some collaboration or whatever online or stopping people from moving forward. But it's a really interesting observation. It kind of shocked me a little bit. We're going to a lot of trouble here, but can we guarantee students are going to get engaged? And you kind of can't, but there's some things you can do to try and enhance that. And I want to talk to you about different types of content, particularly knowledge. So Alison, can I go to the next slide, please? So this slide is a little Eiffel Tower. Some of you probably climbed up it, I imagine. But what we're kind of suggesting here is that, to me, there's a very few different forms of content. So often, we have this material here at the bottom: information, background, industry, and background. And when you read most third-party learner resources, a lot of our RTO resources, they're in that format, the information. So they're very dry and they don't have any applicability. So I've got some information, that's fine, you've got to deal with it. You've got to introduce policies, procedures, job roles, tasks, those kinds of things. Then one way you can show how those things play out in industry is to provide a bit of a case study. So if case study is really just a story which kind of outlines, well, how does this skill happen? We're talking about this being important, then how does that actually kind of play out? Now, you can do these in face-to-face demonstrations and, regularly hear from students that the trainer is generally where they learn most of the information from. So you have to think about ways we can get that voice into your resource. And that could be through video or it could be through audio in terms of discussing background to tasks or whatever it is. And then we've established some kind of knowledge, and we've got a series of online tools which are pretty standard to vary how we show content, and I'll show you a couple of those. We then look at ways that we might give students an opportunity to apply that particular knowledge, to either retrieve that knowledge and define and show they know things, or to be able to involve themselves in particular scenarios or case studies where they're kind of forced to use that knowledge to think through a particular kind of a situation. So we had a unit last year, which was a drone unit, a kind of new Victorian unit, and it had almost a 5-step process that they kept talking about that you had to do. You had to scan the environment to make sure it was clear to fly. You had to understand the laws. You had to fly, bring it back to base, and then you had to safely store. So 5 steps that went through everything that they did. That's a 5-step scenario that you can make. Some person's out in the field, what's the first thing they've got to think about? If they see this, they can't fly, so you can kind of test and check into their knowledge. Now, problems are pretty similar to that, but they might be more open-ended in the sense that it's not something the student works through like a quiz, but they're asked to maybe contribute to a forum, put it in a quiz, or, maybe even do something like do some research and see some things to kind of consider. Now, people often belie quizzes, but I was a basketball referee for a number of years statewide, and we used to pass a license test every year as well as a fitness test. And the license test was just 40 or 50 multiple choice questions with 3 options, but all of them were in the context of a game. So they were real, and there was an application of a rule, and rules change at different points in the game. So it was always really difficult. You could never guess them, and you always had to think through your understanding. So that's kind of one way you can look at how you might do quizzes. Less of a knowledge application retrieval, less knowledge retrieval and more kind of application as well. So let's go to the next slide and have a look at how you might use these particular content types. So information is very much about background, demonstration is instruction. For some courses, you might be able to do that through screen share or a screencast or video, but for others, we're going to have to see it face-to-face. As I said, the case studies are really just contextualizing information, applying it in a real situation. And scenario is extension of that, except students exploring possible options and consequences of decisions that they might make, and problem and knowledge retrieval, pretty much as I kind of described. So this is a good place to start, and then to build quickly to this, and then to this, to try and get students to apply quickly what you've learned. And that's one way of chunking information. Short bit of content, maybe a case study to storify how does it work, then some sort of activity to kind of apply it before you can move on. Thanks, Alison. And so this will really help you with some of the really hard stuff that is to write for e-learning. Like writing for tasks is pretty straight ahead. But things like legislation, frameworks, policies and procedures, and how they operate and how they work is quite difficult. You have to really explain to students what the structure of a policy is and its function. Because often, we don't have those policies, procedures that are riddled through competencies. So if you can find one, that's even better and make it slimmer. It just gives something student to run off. So with this drone project, for example, policy and procedure, policy and procedure, policy and procedure, apply policy and procedure, all the way through it. So we end up inventing, scavenging and rewriting, inventing a really small policy suite of about 10 policies. So it had them for the student to refer to and to support them when they did their kind of assessment task as well. So using your SME is really important, not just as a source of rectifications, but to meeting and to ask them about the competencies you don't fully understand, and just ask them a simple question like, how does this play out in industry? Or what's your experience? Or how have you experienced this? And what you'll often get is a few war stories, which make great case studies. You can record them as an audio so that you get that authentic voice and hear the voice of experience. Or you can use them as kind of part of your case studies, or to help shape your understanding of, say, your knowledge you've been able to trying to get through. And you get the students to kind of think about those issues in a form or an activity. Although forms are often a little bit difficult to kind of manage, particularly because if you're not tied to assessment, students often won't complete them. So I'm going to ask you, I've got a bit of a whiteboard activity for you. What type of content do you need to write? What is the kind of nature of the content that you're going to write? Is it knowledge-based? Is it information? Is it policy and procedure? Is it job processes and tasks? What's the kind of, if you think about what skill you're writing for and knowledge, then what type of content do you have to write? So you can take the text tool from the annotate menu and drop something up there, or you can drop it in the text chat. Either way is fine. I know a few of you mentioned knowledge that you have to write. What's the nature of that knowledge? The technical, legal, procedural, contingency? There are lots of forms of knowledge in VET. Yeah. SOPs are great because they're really concrete generally, aren't they? Just whoever posted that, do you want to quickly talk to a bit about what the nature of that writing is, that content?
Yeah, that's me. So what I'm writing about at the moment, it's mostly about so these trainees work in like a trade branch store. So it's mostly about so for the part of the course I'm using for this course is about how they serve customers. So what are their timelines for greeting someone when they walk in the store, or how soon do they need to answer a phone call, that kind of thing.
So what kind of age are they? Can they vary or?
Yes, but they tend to be, I had a quick look at this. There's some that are 40 plus, but the majority are in their 20s or 30s.
Yeah, okay. Sometimes the characters are
Probably
nice.
even
Oh, sorry.
lower, like the bulk would be in their 20s.
Yep. Sometimes the character is a good vehicle for this. We did cleaning it a couple of years ago. We invented a character who made all the wrong moves according to the policies and SOPs. And so you had to guide them as to what they'd done wrong along the way. And then we built him up as this hopeless person. And then there was a fire in the deli. It was the first time he followed procedure, and so having a character to reveal the wrong way to go, then you can play student can play a bit of an advisory role, write that in that kind of format. So you've turned up to your shift on time. Joe's late as always. What does he need to be reminded of? So it's just at that kind of simple level.
Oh, yeah, that's interesting.
Funny, the guy that we depicted was hopeless, but when we filmed him, we took some photographs of this guy in context. And when he turned up, he was a friend of a friend, and when he turned up, he was hungover. He hadn't washed his hair. He had yesterday's clothes on, and he was tired. And he's perfect. You couldn't have scripted any better. Now this one's interesting. How to unpack a unit of competency? That sounds like you're writing for diploma, or
No,
TAE?
it's a diploma level unit, but it's in the TAE. So it's develop and design assessment tools.
And what has been your thinking there about an approach to kind of maybe bringing some lightness into that, to write it in a way that kind of helps it stick with examples?
So I thought I'd use an example of a unit of competency that our students are familiar with, and I guess do some demonstrations and some helping them to see kind of what works and what doesn't work when you're developing an assessment tool for a practical unit or a practical assessment.
So lots of examples of difference in instruction needs or comprehension, and being able to identify those kinds of things, or dragging and dropping sentences together to create good checklists. And
yes, yep, I thought that sort of task would be good in terms of trying to get them to interact with the content.
And there's also probably a little bit in there about comprehension around why we need to do this too, isn't there? The importance of unpacking and why that's important, and why I need to cover all the different components.
Possibly I could go into the things like the principles of assessment and rules of evidence. Yes, although at the point that I imagine the students would use this online learning module, they would have already covered that, and it's more about revision of what we've already done and getting them on to actually being able to do it themselves, so that they can create their assessments that they have to, their assessment tools that they have to do as part of their TAE assessments.
They're probably already holding up crucifix when they hear the word principal assessment.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Joe. And this one here, developing and applied research skills as a vet trainer. That sounds really interesting.
Sorry, that's me.
Oh, good.
I was thinking about what do I need to do. It's actually given me some good ideas to go forth with that. So yeah, I'm thinking we certainly need some example research proposals. We're just giving them a blank template, but not necessarily any of the, something to build off of for their own, and potentially some scenarios about what as a vet trainer, why would you do research? What kind of things would you focus in on? Because there's not many role models around for that for them.
That's the big picture, isn't it? And to what end is that research going to do? And it's probably to improve your delivery, or reach another cohort, or adopt a different approach, or build a close relationship to industry. So finding out what each participant's reason is a good way of being able to customize content. That's where it gets a bit more difficult at diploma level, because people coming in from industry with different roles, then how do you provide enough examples to whet their appetite and see themselves in those bigger picture, independent kind of tasks? This is a beauty. Information, policies and procedures and task driven. Was that you too, Alison, or was it was you, Joe? Was it?
No, that was me.
Oh, good on you. That's
Yeah.
like fun.
Well, look, I've been tasked with doing this digital literacy course, but not digital literacy, actually relating to the learning management system, but I'm turning it into more of an orientation welcome module. So I'm thinking that's what I'll do this course on now rather than the diploma. So it will be a lot of information for them because it's onboarding them into the RTO so that they understand what options they have as students, how the organisation works, who to talk to, what the late submission policies are, like right down to those little very ground things that are really important to them. And then actually using the LMS, how to submit as an assignment, how to email your teacher, how to use a chat group, how to use a discussion group. So those I think would be the task doing.
Yeah.
But I kind of like your idea about the character or a video that has a student not doing the right thing, like not reporting their attendance or
Or
their
even,
absence. Yeah.
or every time you're on board someone, it's a great opportunity to revisit the values of the organisation. And
Yes.
so they probably already have those if they've been working with you. But if they're going to an online space, then that character can help remind how those values now apply when you're in this. So you get that, reinforcement of good practice for feedback, good practice for, helping students through an issue, good practice for writing or assessing, whatever it might be in that kind of space.
Yeah.
Beauty.
Yeah. I just don't want it to be dry. If it's their first experience of us, I want it to be engaging.
Yeah. And yeah, I think you have a lot of fun with that because it is a toughie.
Yeah, thanks for that, Mick.
No worries. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Alison, I'm going to go to the next slide. Thanks very much for all that. That was good. So, look, I think I mentioned before about quizzes. Quiz is a great opportunity to step away from knowledge retrieval, and so getting students in the example I showed you earlier, getting them to apply knowledge situation that they'll confront rather than just retrieve that knowledge. And you can make a kind of a subset of questions around a process. It doesn't have to be linked, but step students through a typical process that need to understand the steps and have a question for each one. You can mix them up quite a bit, and in terms of different types of assessment, we've got multiple choice. Here on the left, we've got an example of a replace the word, or sometimes called a close exercise. And then we've got a really simple kind of activity, which is built in a case study. And the one on the left there is with students watch a video to retrieve that information. So if you use video, you can do a formal knowledge check on it in this way, or you can ask the questions in advance of them so that they're watching it and looking for that video as well. And also go to the next one. I mean, part of the problem of writing is like understanding the platform that you use. So this is a platform called Articulate Rise, which has tabs. So each one of these tabs, as you select it, will reveal some form of information that's in there. So it means that you can, it's just another way of getting around a bullet list, to be honest with you. And it just helps you to kind of chunk information that's a bit bigger into smaller parts that might be connected in some shape or form. And so, generally with information knowledge, let's start at the end. What's the end point you want to get them to? And then work backwards. It'll be like a newspaper headline where often the headline, they tell you the important information up front, but then you find a lot of gumph, and then you get it reinforced at the end of the article as well. And a table is a good alternative to bullet points too. The issue with these is they become a bit interactive, they become a bit tactile, and it's got to do something to access the information. Even just clicking a mouse, it could just help their circulation. You never know. Next one, please, Alison. So that brings me to typical platform tools that you'll see for various functions in learner management systems or tools like Articulate Rise, someone mentioned How To last week, which are essentially what we call rapid e-learning tools. So a little bit like PowerPoint, but they're for publishing learning content. So they come with a range of interactions, but most of them cross over in some sense. So in content, we've got a whole range of different heading styles to perform a bit of hierarchy of knowledge. You might create yourself a little simple style guide as to how you'll do that. Some systems will have like boxes for you to create quotes or statements. So you punch text out in a big form. Accordions, I'll show you one in a minute, and I'll show you a flashcard. They're often pretty common ways of using content. And then with video, you can upload it to your LMS, but we don't recommend that. We recommend you probably put up to a third-party video tool to then embed it so that they take the bandwidth for you. And some tools allow you to create interactive video. So you bring a third-party video or your own into the tool. You can stop the video and you can ask students a question, make a comment, or show another video, or even go to some other form of interaction or presentation. So one of the tools that does this really quite well is a tool called H5P, which is an open source set of tools for creating discrete learning activities rather than connected. So they still have to be connected in some other tool, but work really well. Audio is pretty much the same. And then in terms of interactions, we've got quizzes, drag and drops, dragging different concepts to match up. Sometimes they're called matching or sorting information. So you've got examples of tools, and tools come up and students then sort them into electrical, hand, manual, whatever, automated. Close or fill in the gaps, which we saw earlier, or labeled image. It really depends on your platform, where you can put an image up and then put some interactive markers on it and let the learners select those to see a process or another way of providing information. And some platforms have a dedicated scenario tool, which is like a quiz, the series of quiz questions, but they have a couple of additional things. Instead of feedback, they'll have another slide which the student goes to if they select it and they're incorrect. So they might choose an option, see the consequence of that option, ask to consider something, and then maybe come back to the question to have another crack at it. So it's like a quiz, but you can customize every consequence or option screen that students see when they go through. Then we've got collaboration things like discussion forums or surveys, students who do some independent research, or even some small group work tasks that you can kind of farm out to, various tools like Office 365 or Google. So they're pretty much typical tools that you'll see in all learner management systems. So the trick then is to kind of work out how you might write for those. So this is an accordion. You can see you've got a heading, and when you select the heading, it opens up the content and you see what's kind of inside. Purely and simply a device to eliminate a bit of text from the screen. It's still got the same number of words, you've just kind of just hidden them. So some things to think about when you're working on your learner management system. If I go to the next slide, please, Alice. Is that there's quite a few literacies going on in an online environment. There's obviously reading, comprehending. There's also the visual aspect and auditory. And so the information types that we described earlier, you might need to think about what's the best way of presenting that information. Is it text? Is it video, or is it audio? And how much is too much? This is the one I always struggle with. Remembering that learners typically only scan the first bit of information. So if we keep it lively, we can use some of those alternatives to bullet lists to kind of break up what content's there. And that's where storytelling can kind of help incorporating the concepts with those characters to help them engage with that form of literacy. It does in some tools, Alison. In Articulate Rise, you just sort of fill out a kind of a form and it makes them for you. But certainly in H5P and Moodle, it certainly does too. So this brings me to another principle of thinking about how you might write. And we go to the next slide, Alison, please. And this is a really old model. It's about 10 years old, but it's still kind of honest, I reckon, and good. So I'll give you a link to this. And it's really sort of saying, the typical structure of a course is that we have some objectives, we have some sections with maybe some information and knowledge check, and we continue all that way, but we assess at the end. But if you just click the slide again, Alison, thank you, it's hidden there. Another way of looking at that is to, give the students a reason to actually use your content. So have some activities kind of all the way up front and surround them with the content that they need for that. Which is a little bit kind of like how we solve problems, in the sense that we go to colleagues or we go to resources or we look online. So it's really showing students how to solve their own kind of issues. But this is the important thing. We have some reason to use that particular content. And I'm going to show you a couple of methods that we can use to do that. And so the next slide talks about how you might start a unit. So this is an excerpt from that drone unit. It's pretty dry stuff. So we throw them straight into this activity with a little animation of a drone flying over a picnic. And we ask them, is this the right thing to do? They don't know anything about it at all. What would you do? Let's just suss out what you know and warm them up to the kind of activity. And they're pretty much all dangerous, but there's a couple of options for them to kind of, not common sense, because I don't like that word, but to sort of think of this, I think this is what it should be. And it's low stakes. It doesn't really matter. It's just whetting their appetite. When they first start the course, they've got a problem to go to straight away that reflects the kind of knowledge with a reasonable guess that they can use. You can use third-party videos or create your own. And also mentioned in the next slide that you hear the voice, that students hear the voice of experts. These are really easy to do. So this is an interview with a drone pilot. And so we introduced him and we asked him about experience and what the key things you need to be a successful RPA operator. And so he lived in Perth. We met him online in Zoom, recorded the Zoom session to our computer, and then shared the video from that, cut it up, and then shared the video with him. So a really simple process, but we got some really, really interesting kind of stuff. So that's another way you can kind of show content. Another one is pro tips, which is kind of like a bogus way of being able to say, okay, let's just make this stand out as a bit of advice for you, Sunny and daughter Jimmy and Jane. This is a bit of advice to you about what's kind of important at this point in the course. So it's almost like the voice of the trainer picking you up. You might use another device there, which is no worries. And I mentioned earlier, you might create a company. And that's the next step, really. So this is an example of a company. This is my higher ed course, but it's created a sneaker company for a unit around updating digital presence. You don't have to go into too much problem, but this is a bit of background about the company to set the scene. This was a data analysis unit, which nearly killed me. And then every time you get an opportunity to talk about sort of big picture concepts, you can bring the company into it and say, well, this is what they do. And you can provide examples that relate back to something that's kind of familiar. It's purely and simply a device to try and provide, a bit of engagement in there as well. All right, I've got a couple of slides. I'll just, I've already mentioned this one, which this is creating some policy and procedure documents as support, because often assessments relate to those and they're not provided. So this is a good opportunity to create some forms. You can often find these, the client might have them and you can use theirs verbatim, but if you don't have them, then you can search for them. We found most of these online, just doctored them and created into plain English and rewrite them, which took a little bit of time, but it was well worth it, because we could then, if someone was a policy and procedure mentioned in that, we could say, take a look at this to get a bit of a sense of it and then do this activity. So I've got time to do this. Let's look at a little activity here. Thinking about those kind of content types, case study, a scenario and a problem, and thinking about what you're writing now or developing, and thinking about what's one example of a case study you could do that's would work really well in your topic area. One example of a scenario, and then one example of a problem you could pose to students, whether that be a quiz or research, contribution, discussion. This is an opportunity to think about how you might be a little creative with the content and how you depict it. So I'll give you a minute or two to think about that. A scenario is good for touch points around contingencies, problems, need to apply, legal documents, communication is great for scenarios, customer interactions. In fact, everything really, occupational health and safety, emergencies, the whole thing, consultation and everything. Yeah, perfect. So someone has accentuating circumstances that affect their attendance and progression. What steps would they take? So yeah, that's a really interesting. I could really tease that one out, couldn't you? In terms of support, how you support them, methods you have to think about to kind of bring them back up to speed. Do you want to talk a little bit about that case study? A little bit more detail?
It's a common problem
Yeah.
where students, it's something, life just happens, and then they don't attend, and then they may not attend for some time, they become at risk, their progression drops off. But there are steps they could take in a process there, where if something did happen and they talk to the right people, a plan can be put in place, and easily then they can continue with an extension or something like that.
So it's a bit of so it's about reaching out, isn't it? Because they're the and seeing if everything's okay. So that awareness.
Yeah, and so knowing who to talk to first, and what steps to take, and what to ask for, and just making that process easy. So I don't understand clearly the difference between a case study and a scenario.
Well, case studies really is really just a story. So, for example,
so Sally's auntie has had an accident and she needs to go to Melbourne, or something like that. That's the story.
Yeah. So you say, like, every student you will have students occasionally have extenuating circumstances that can't attend.
Yeah.
So, for example, the example you just showed. So, and then you would actually talk about, in our instance, what we do is contact to see if they're all right and take them through the steps. That's one way you could kind of do it, or you could rewrite it as an example of what a student experiences going through those particular steps. That's really the story of what happens, or the application of that process as a story to kind of make it come alive a bit. So, whereas a scenario is that you could use that same case study, but you bust it down to particular steps, and each step you stop and ask the student how to progress to the next step. So someone doesn't turn up. What are you going to do? Don't worry about it. They'll turn up eventually. I'll reach out to, what's the name? I'll ask my manager for advice, and then you can show the consequences of each of those. That's not a bad choice, but you might lose a student if you do that. There's probably another way you could go about that. So it's a way of exploring and applying what you're kind of trying to instill in the learner from the information in the case study.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
And we're gonna, so assessment tool is another beauty. You want to quickly talk about that? I reckon that's yours, Joe.
So pretty straightforward, just presenting them with a tool that they've been told has a problem, or that has big issues, and they have to go about working out, well, what are the issues, what's wrong with this assessment tool.
So it's almost like an exemplar kind of activity, isn't it? In a sense, and exposing students to the marking guide and examples of that, and seeing what's kind of wrong.
Yep.
This is a doozy. Is that one of yours too?
Yeah, that's mine as well.
So go on.
Just giving them an actual scenario that they have to work with, so that they've got sort of an end goal in mind when they're having a go at designing an assessment tool.
That's a real doozy, because there's pretty high stakes, that one, isn't it? In terms of being able to bust a relationship through a lack of clarity of understanding, and not getting to the bottom of who the office works need is, and all those kinds of things,
I guess you need to provide them with some more information on that, on what the scenario is.
And probably reinforce things around getting out of yourself and not looking at them through what you think they should do, but really finding out what they need, which is often a bit tricky for trainers.
Yep.
Because a bit entrepreneurial and creative is you'd have a lot of fun with that one. And I reckon this one is yours, Carl. Would I be right there?
Yep, you got me.
And so is
It's spot the non-TAE point, I guess, but yeah.
no, that looks like a beauty. So what they need to know here is so this is really about listening, isn't it? Listening and then adapting response according to what they want in line with your product and service
Yeah.
availability. So it's not so much about your knowledge of products, it's as much about your listening skills, I would think. Would that be right?
Yeah. So yeah, what I'm covering is kind of across 3 units and
Beauty.
then chopped up and mapped in different ways, and then I'm chopping it again in a different way. So yeah.
That sounds like a really good strategy. Write once, use often. And Alison, if I've got time, this must be yours. Is this yours? The applied research?
Yeah, no, this is great for me. I'm already thinking about what I might be able to do to improve this, the unit, the TAE RES 501. Yeah.
Tarika, was that yours?
No, that's me. That's me.
Okay, that's great. So yeah, looks like we've got some nice ways of being able to represent information and think about how to make it creative. And like if you're getting stuck with any of these, then pop something up on the discussion board, and I'm looking for ideas, and we can kind of respond, one of us. But thank
Is
you.
this the new TAE unit, Alison?
The RES, the TAE RES 501. No,
Yeah.
I don't know. I've just been teaching the dual diploma, and anyway, I won't give you the long story of it now. But yeah, I don't know. It's not new. It's because there was a RES 501 A or B.
Yeah. Okay.
Just an elective.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. That was great. I enjoyed that. Cheers.
So I've just double check I've saved it. So we'll make sure we keep all those and put them over the slides. We're just going to go through. There's some of those things I think we'll cover anyway. So I'm just going to skip in here because I'd like to get us into a breakout room and do one more applied thing before we head out. So Michael's given you some amazing stuff you can do. So having a licensed product like Articulate Rise or similar, I've got that in the Moodle course around some of those Articulate 360, I think it is. So there's a whole range of Articulate tools that are around, but some alternatives that you might not have a licensed product for. So in the Moodle course, we've got a whole, referred to some of the resources and stuff you might need if you want to do a deeper dive into any of these areas. I just want to quickly talk about some of the accessibility we had there and technical things that we need to think about when we're producing content. So Michael talked about, having the voice of authority or the voice of experience and recording that. So where possible, you want to output that as an MP3. So it's the type of file that you output. So if you're recording it on an Apple product, if you've got the option, please save it as an MP3. These are called open standards. So they're developed in a way that if you create your online course effectively, it doesn't matter what device the student's on, they should be able to use it. So audio's MP3, video's MP4 file format, images, we're looking for what they call the JPEG or the PNG there. And where possible, make sure that when you're inputting text into an environment that it's HTML. I don't think we have as much problems these days. I think most people do set up online environments that have HTML as the thing that makes it drive, but it will make your life. So just a quick example, I started investigating e-learning in the year 2003, 2004, and my organisation was using something that started with a W. Can't even remember what it is because I was just trained in it. Then they moved to a thing called Janison Learning Management System. So they had to get it out of this, all of the content they had in this other one, into Janison. And then in around 2007 or 8, they were encouraged to move across to Moodle. And it took that organisation to get it out of their content out of Janus and into Moodle, took that organisation, I think, nearly 2 years, about $300,000 for a human to manually scrape out the stuff they needed and pop it into another space. So this is why if we try to develop stuff in an open format, that it will live a longevity through one platform to another, even an upgrade from Moodle from 3, it looks like it's going to move up to a 4 soon, etc. So wherever possible, outputs in MP3. And then the other thing is, I think about the internet is, we talk about the internet as if it's one thing. Like I say, one internet, many platforms. So the amount of times that I've had to triage students around, I can't view that video that's embedded there. When I open the page, this doesn't happen. On my device, the button's not showing, right? So what you've got to remember is when you're developing things, as Michael's talked about, the SCORM. SCORM is an internationally recognised way of bringing together information. But you'll have students who might be on a Mac, you might be on an iPhone, they might be on Android, they might be on Linux, and I think there's another, all these different operating systems that students might be on in a device. They might be on a Safari, they might be on Firefox, they might be on Chrome, they might be on Edge. God forbid that they're not in Internet Explorer anymore, because not even Microsoft wants to know anything to do with that. And they all function similar but different. And as I mentioned, these devices. So some of your students might be lucky and have a lovely laptop. Some of them may only be able to come in on a mobile phone. So when we're creating content, what does it look like? Is it responsive? And that when it goes onto a mobile phone, they're not having to pinch out or move across the screen to actually access and be part of what it is in your online device. Right? So they're just some high-level things to think about when you're creating courses. I'm always a big believer of repurposing, a very agile approach to getting things online. And there's lots of, Michael said that, you can go and find these example policies and procedures and shape them for your example companies and so on. So I've just got a couple of bits of advice here. If there's a document or like a YouTube video you want to use, then link to the document. So don't download the document and then upload it into your eSpace. It does mean the learner needs to go out, but it means that you've left it there. It's the source of truth. You're not actually taking something that's not yours and putting it somewhere else. There's some great ways to embed. I'm showing you in the Moodle how you can get the embedded code to embed. It looks like the video is sitting in your site, but it's not. It makes it a lot more lighter. And if you're accessing, you need images, there's thousands and billions and trillions of images, but make sure that we attribute them as we go through. And if you do need to take a screed of text from something else, then make sure you reference it like you'd expect your students to reference it. If you've got licensed product already, some of you I think have already got some licensed product, just check your license, see if you can move it from the format you've currently got it, which might be to print it and give it to students. Make sure that license also allows you to put it into the online space so you meet some of the copyright stuff. If you're not sure, go to smartcopying.edu.au or tap into your local library and see if they've got some insight into, how can I use this content in a way that I'm not going to breach copyright? So just some high-end stuff there, and I've put it into the Moodle as well if you want more detail around that. So we've done all of that developing. We've done some testing or quality assurance around copyright, around will it work across the different devices? Have we got these formats that are able to open, etc. So you need to test it on ideally a couple of devices and so on. I would, as I said, somebody else to develop, and then I usually do the trialing bit, but you may get the client to do it, you might get a colleague to do it, you might, anybody that's dear to you, help you to do some of this testing and trialing it. But you want to make sure that you've tried to iron out any of the issues before it gets to the implementation stage, which is what we'll do next. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to get you to go into a breakout room. I'm going to give you, find my other cheat sheet here. Yes, so the first thing I do, I've just borrowed this from someone else and repurposed it. A very simple kind of quality checklist. So when you're looking at something or you're asking a colleague or somebody who's dear to you to give you some feedback about your course, some of this idea, as Michael was saying before, ideally you would have got the grammar and the language style already out the way before you go into the build, but sometimes you're in the build and this is where you're going to get the feedback. You might not have been able to get it in there. So just let me know if you can't get access to the document at this stage. Has anybody got any issues clicking on that link and getting okay, so what I'm going to do is I want you just to quickly reacquaint yourself, though you might not need to, you might be able to jump straight into there. This is just as an example, and we've got another one in the slides we can show in a little while. But what I want you to do when you get in your breakout room, remember to open the chat. I didn't put that in there as an instruction. So all these instructions will stick when you get in there. So introduce yourself. And then what do you want to know when to have this kind of final prototype, right? What are the things when you get somebody to test or trial it for you, for them to come back and tell you? So any questions about the activity once you get in the breakout rooms? Let me just build these. So it's only about 5 minutes activity. I'll come in and check on you, see you're okay, but I'm going to build the room. Beautiful. Yep, and let me know if there's any issues. Nice, I jumped in quickly. So yeah, that time goes so fast, doesn't it? Yeah, I'll go and check on them. Maybe
Okay,
allow a couple of minutes, and then yeah, we've still got. Try to
push that slide of mine to next week. That's okay.
Well, it's in there. As I said, it's in there. So they've got it as
Inside
a resource.
the document,
yeah. So they've got it as a resource, the same as some of those others that we've missed out on there. But yeah, I might see if we've got time. Otherwise, I might just get them to use the chat for this one, and then just run through these ones and see if we can get them up on time. All right, I'm going to go and check on them.
Yep.
Let me just be quiet.
Document from here.
I've got it. Yes.
Introduce yourself to one another, then review the quality checklist. What needs to be checked in your final prototype before sign off?
Okay. Yeah, I'm looking at the wrong thing.
Just going to click on it.
Where am I? Well, we're looking at the online course quality checklist, right?
Yeah, we are.
Yep. All
So
right, cool.
what has to be signed off for the final prototype? Well, definitely grammar.
Yeah.
I think readability and language style should be in the first feedback run. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, making sure that we're on the right page. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah.
I think
So before we've got
functionality is important, like links break all the time.
Yeah, that's one of the main things, I think. But kind of as discussed before, like might be working for the person you test with, but not not for the end user. But got to try it as much as we can.
Yep. I think user acceptance would be done before that.
Yeah, but I think you wouldn't necessarily know exactly until you tested it with enough people.
Yep. Yeah,
So
that's true. You wouldn't have a
you might say
sample.
that.
Oh, really? Okay.
Big brother here.
Are you recording us, Mick?
Yeah, but it's just the way it goes. The recording goes with me. I can leave if you want and leave.
No, that's okay.
But
I
anything
think
you say
Alison
will be used.
actually was I think Alison was calling us back.
Yeah, I think you usually get a message in here which will give you some time to,
Yeah,
there you
she
go.
is.
Yeah,
60 seconds to head back.
Their little sign came up before saying 2 minutes. That's how I knew it was coming to an end.
How did you go?
Yeah, good. We just decided that this checklist looks quite handy.
Beautiful. Yep. Yeah, there's a bit in there. There's lots to check.
Yeah.
Different people always have different kind of priorities too, what they want to check.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was just telling Alison myself about quality of video recordings and how some people use extremely poor quality sound. They don't add any captions or the availability of text, video text to be downloaded.
Yeah.
People with hearing impairments might not have, they can't hear it, or the
Yep.
environment's too noisy. They will like to read it, and all the other issues, parochialism. Using things like, oh, you're going to Coles, shopping. Oh, well, a foreign student won't know what that is.
Yeah.
Examples like that.
Cultural things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes you don't find that until students give you a blank look when you're.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
To come back through. And
Like Big Brother.
Yes, I always feel like it's Darth Vader.
I know. Can't hide.
So look, that was kind of a cook's tour, and as I said, it's a very basic checklist. But what are the key things that we should be looking for? In terms of quality. So this is before you release it either to a client from Michael and I's perspective, or if you're actually going to release it to your students. What kind of things do you want to make sure that things are okay? So what I might get you to do is, I've got it as an annotate here, so please don't annotate. Please use the chat. So pop the chat back out if you haven't got it out. And I'll put the question in there and I'll run through some of the other slides. So what should be in your final kind of sign-off sheet before you release this to a student, basically? And so you'll be writing this for maybe another third party, or it might be just your own, because it's good to also have those criteria for yourself. So what would you put into your sign-off sheet? You may like to use, if you're going to gather this from a few people, you can gather this kind of information through some of the online forms. So I've just got an example there of Microsoft Forms. So there's forms within your Office 365 suite, or Michael and I are both Googlers, so we would have Google Forms, or if anything else. So please think about, do you want them to fill it out through using this kind of format? Once you get that feedback from, you've checked it, ask somebody else to check it, make sure it works the way you'd expect it for a student, get that feedback. That's why you've got some sort of form or some sort of checklist for them to give you that feedback in a structured way. And we've got in the slides another example how you might do that. So have a look once they go up. And then you need to consider, will you update based on that feedback? Because obviously your opinion, their opinion, etc. But if it's anything to do with quality, links, that responsiveness, does it actually work on a mobile phone, or does it work on that type of mobile phone? Then you might need to do some updates. And then again, if you're working with a client or even internally, when I first started going online, I built it. Well, we built it. I designed it. Somebody else built it. I've been doing that for a long time. And we actually had a quality control department that would not move it off the development site to the delivery site until they had gone through. So they had to kind of give it the big seal of approval. So it might be that as well. So that's what we've just gone through, giving you some ideas around, the different kinds of content. So I've given you some ideas in the Moodle around how you might convert some of your existing content, use other people's, or some of that amazing stuff Michael does with his Articulate Rise. Remember, we still need to think about the legal, technical, and the functionality of those spaces. Check everything works. I've called it pilot, a prototype, a trial, whatever you want to call it. Analyze that feedback, document that feedback, and then apply and move on. So being the applied action model that we're asking you to do, we'd like you to take some of the things that we've given you today, both in the session here, plus in the Moodle course, take a component of your course. So it might be you might get through all of your storyboard, or it might be that you just take a component. So think about between now and a fortnight's time, how much time you've got, or how much time you can etch out. I always think about, because you've probably already filled up your diary with stuff already. How much time have I got to just test and trial a small component? So develop it, you check it, make sure that fits within your quality assurance checklist, and then ask a third party to check it. So it might be somebody in your organisation if you're doing something internal that doesn't allow Michael and I to get our fingers and toes. If it's something visual, then some screenshots. We can give you some feedback in terms of some of the visual if we can't physically get into your e-space. And so develop it, QA it, and then come and share with us how that process went. 2 reasons. One is it kind of helps try to keep you accountable to do this work and help you start your online course development. But also then you get to see other people's work and you get those ideas, that kind of community of learning through what everybody's doing, not just what you're doing, please. So I'll put that in more detail in the Moodle course as I've done previously. If you get stuck at all, please just reach out. Okay, so you've got both of our email addresses. There's the discussion forum board in the Moodle course. There's resources in the Moodle course about how to do some of these things. And you've always got your friend, the search engine, or some people call them Google. Google it as well. So as I mentioned, your case for action is to update or change what you're currently doing by building an online course. We talked about the 4 steps of the development process. We want you now to go away and apply that, bring it back to the Moodle, ideally before next session, but we know that it might not happen because life gets really busy. And then we've only got 1 more in a fortnight's time. And so I'm going to quickly wrap up. So I'll put that into the Moodle. All right, develop, test and trial, share in the Moodle and give feedback from us and others. I'll leave that open if you can hang about, but otherwise I will close it up by saying see you in a fortnight's time. Thank you for your contributions today, and I hope that you get to do some playing and enjoy that play as well. So any last comments or questions? If not, please just bottom right, close that what is it? Zoom. I kept thinking Moodle there. Zoom, and see you online.
Thanks, Alison. Thanks, Mick. Bye.
See you later.
Take it easy.
Bye, everyone.
Take care. Good luck.
Stay safe wherever you are.
Thanks, everyone.
No worries.
Bye.
See ya.
See you later.
See ya.